Hello friends, I hope you are doing good. Welcome to the Videsh Niti series. The topic of discussion for today is the global space race and India's space diplomacy. So, if we look at the global space race and India's space diplomacy, one thing is very clear today that the space sector has become the new arena of all geopolitical contestation. All major superpowers in the world, that include the US and the British, along with that of the Chinese, which are emerging as a superpower today, they all are trying to undertake a space race. We are witnessing a similar phenomena that we witnessed during the Cold War period, which was at that time between the Americans and the Soviet Union. Space contestation has always been an arena of rather interesting concern to the world diplomacy, because over a period of time what has happened is that because of this ongoing space race, many countries have sent satellites all over. And today, what has happened apparently is that there is an overcrowding effect. So, because of this overcrowding effect in the space, because of sending too many satellites, the space race today is not of sending satellites to space, but the space race today is all about how to create technologies that are basically able to tackle so many satellites, destroy them in the space when they have no utility, thereby taking the space race to the concept of anti-satellite technology. And this is where the concern lies, because in this new geopolitical contestation today, the manifestation of the space race is seen in the form of a military use. So, if you are able to understand, during the Cold War period, the objective of the space race was basically to send satellites to space. At that time, the focus was that which country has too many satellites and how many countries are able to dominate the space with more number of satellites. The new feature today in the post Cold War period about the space race is that countries are more concerned about managing those satellites. To manage those satellites, they have to see two things. The first thing they have to see is that which satellite has served its utility. If it has served its utility, then they are developing technologies to destroy that satellite in the space, because there's as of now no technology where you can launch a satellite and bringing back down. So you cannot bring back the satellite down to the earth. It has to be destroyed in the space. So now when you destroy a satellite in the space, that is where, as I said, the concern lies, because when you destroy a satellite of your own country, you possess technology through which you can destroy the satellite of another country. So the space race today in reality has taken a very dangerous turn, because countries are now witnessing a problem that what if another country, which could be my adversary, actually blow up my satellite in the space, and that could create not only the problem for the satellite of the country, but also another problem of what is known as the space debris. So it is in this context that if we look at the ongoing space race today, then the British have recently released a document called the Defense Space Strategy. Now, a basic look at this document of the British very clearly tells us one thing, that the British are primarily concerned about purely military activities of space. The document talks about Britishers' activities and approach for electronic warfare. The British document also mentions about how the British wants to today develop anti-satellite technologies to manage space debris, to that of undertaking directed energy weapons through space wars, etc. So, a cursory look at the British document proves that they have military connotations, and they don't want to basically use the space as of now for any civilian activity. They want to use the space purely for offensive purpose and purely for military purpose. Now, in contrast, if we have a look at it with the case of China, the Chinese have recently come out with what is called as the white paper on space. This is one of the rare documents that the Chinese have put up in the public domain, considering that the Chinese normally do not put up documents in the public domain for the larger world to see. But if we look at the Chinese white paper on space, then few things again are very clear there. The first thing is that the Chinese have given very clearly that their objective in the space is to seek civilian benefits. So their objective is that civilian benefits matter the most to us. So Chinese are of the opinion that what we want to do in the space is that we want to use it purely for civilian purposes. We want to use it for the purpose of benefit of development, benefit of humanity, and they have in detail talked about that how they are also providing the GPS facilities through their satellites to other countries. So, if we broadly look at the Chinese document, then one thing is very clear, that China wants to create an image that their space program is purely civilian. But if you look at it very carefully, one important aspect about China is that though it appears to be a civilian approach, the entire Chinese space program at the back end is actually controlled by the Chinese military. So it is in this context that if you look at the space strategy of China, they are actually giving the civilian program as a shield, wherein every aspect of their space program today apparently has a military backing. Now, the bigger problem for China also, as we see in the Chinese white paper, is that they have mentioned in detail about the space debris. They have, devoted 2 to 3 paragraphs where they have talked about the fact that space debris today have emerged as a new concern. And they have advocated, in fact, that the Chinese are developing capabilities not only to tackle the satellites which have outlived their utility in the space, but they are developing technologies also for the purpose of managing the space debris. So it is in this context, when you read these paragraphs, one thing is very clear, that the Chinese connotations at the military level are very clearly visible. So we very clearly see that, while the British are outright in saying and talking about their defense and military capabilities at the space level, and on the other hand, when you look at China, while giving a shield or a facade of, the civilian activity, at the end of the day, if you look at it carefully, their space program also has a military connotation. Not only because it wants to develop anti-satellite technologies, but as I stated, that all their civilian space programs are actually controlled at the back end by the Chinese military. So one thing is very clear, there is a global space race happening today. The British and the Chinese are on a massive competition. But let's not forget one thing, the global dominant player in the space race remains still today the US. Whether it is the Blue Origin launch, whether it is the SpaceX, or whether it is the James Webb telescope that they have recently launched, all this very clearly proves that the pioneer in the global space race remains the US itself. So while US is able to maintain its hegemony, its supremacy, the British, along with the Americans, are creating one umbrella of space, and the Chinese are trying to compete with that. So question now largely arises that where does all this leave India today, and what about India's space diplomacy? So firstly, India is very clear right from the day one that our space sector is purely for civilian purposes, and we have always reaped the maximum benefits of our civilian space program. But in the recent times, considering there is growing militarization of space, and considering that one of our neighbors, who apparently also happens to be one of our adversaries, is concerned with basically sending kind of activities and doing activities at the military level in the space. So India also has taken some preventive steps in that regard. One of the steps we have taken is that we have created a defense space agency. And today we also have a defense space research organization. While we have developed some capabilities to tackle anti-satellite technologies also, but the bigger concern for India is not the global space race, but the China. Because if Chinese today are able to develop technologies through which they are able to destroy their satellites, tomorrow they could target ours. And this is one reason, in the larger context, we have to see our Defense Space Agency and its recent creation. And also, it is in this larger context we have to see the anti-satellite technologies that India is also trying to work upon. So, India, one thing is clear, is not very concerned about the global space race, but what does concern us is obviously the case of China and the capabilities they are trying to develop. So the larger way ahead for India in this overall strategy is that it should try and work with the British and the American agencies very closely, and it should try to enhance its own space technologies and space capabilities so that it is able to create adequate deterrence for any adversary which may try to harm us. Thank you.